Again, Amy, I also want to say that song is so beautiful. It really, really moved my heart. I can feel the tears like sitting right there for me.
Thankful Collins.
Yeah. And thank you for introducing it in such a thoughtful manner and bringing our attention to it.
Hmm.
Compassion, and I just want to mention first is like, what is compassion? You know, one of my teachers says, compassion is love in action. So compassion is really love that is put in a particular form. When the light of the divine shines fully, compassion arises naturally, like the fragrance of a blossoming flower. So compassion is love in action. When the light of the divine shines fully, compassion arises naturally, like the fragrance of a blossoming flower. Compassion is not pity. Compassion is not a weakness. Compassion arises when we can truly see. Compassion arises when our hearts are open. I want to read a poem by Hafiz, and it's called My Sweet Crushed Angel. Hafiz says, "You have not danced so badly, my dear, trying to hold hands with the beautiful one. You have waltzed with great style, my sweet crushed angel, to have ever neared God's heart at all. Our partner is notoriously difficult to follow, and even his best musicians are not always easy to hear. So what if the music has stopped for a while? So what if the price of admission to the divine is out of reach tonight? So what, my sweetheart, if you lack the ante to gamble for real love? The mind and the body are famous for holding the heart ransom. But Hafiz knows the beloved's eternal habits. Have patience, for he will not be able to resist your longings and charms for long. You have not danced so badly, my dear, trying to kiss the magnificent one. You have actually waltzed with tremendous style, my sweet, oh, my sweet crushed angel." I love this poem so much. And the reason that I love it is because it is filled with compassion. I think it recognizes our journey in the world, our journey as human beings, our journey as spiritual seekers. When I first got into metaphysics in the 80s, I learned about thought as creative, and it was very enlightening to me, and it was like, wow, I got a mate. And then I would see people who had been in metaphysics maybe for 10, 15 years, and they were struggling, and I go like, what's wrong with them? Now here, many years later, my thinking has shifted because it is a journey. It's a journey to get back into our hearts. It's a journey to embrace the divine that is alive in us. And it needs a lot of compassion. And that is what I hear in this poem. It's like we try to dance, we put in the effort to dance with the beloved that is expressing as us. And there are many times we miss the boat. And can we have compassion for ourselves? Because compassion really starts with ourselves. But let me first get into it's like why don't we feel compassion? What gets in our way? And Marilyn was already mentioning something, we might see somebody in need and we feel uncomfortable. There's this incredibly uncomfortable feeling that we haven't learned to be with. It's not that the feeling can't be there because it's going to be there. But the point is, do we have enough bandwidth? Do we have enough space to be with it? Can I be uncomfortable and still acknowledge the other person? Can I be uncomfortable and still see the light in the other person? We have, I've said it before, and many others I'm sure have said it too, is like right now, the political situation in the country, we have many opportunities to be super uncomfortable with what's going on. Can we still see the light in the other person? Can we still see the spark of the divine? And if we can't see it, can we at least remember that it should be there somewhere? What gets in the way of experiencing compassion? When we are stressed out and we are overwhelmed, again, it seems like there's no bandwidth to deal with what is going on for another. We tend to shut down. We tend to narrow our focus because we feel like we already have so much going on in our own plate. There can be unprocessed pain and trauma. It's like when we see somebody else's pain, and that can also be part of the uncomfortableness, something is stirred in us. Maybe we have been, not even if it is in the similar space, but maybe we are afraid to be on the street. When I first came to the States, I came from Holland, and at the time, the social system was really well set up. So ending up on the street, that likelihood wasn't really there for me, even if I didn't have a job. But here, I saw so many people on the street, and I was really scared. It's like, what if I didn't make it? What if I didn't earn enough money? What if I didn't have a place to stay? Then what? So if I have that fear within me and I don't deal with it, and I see somebody living on the street, that can really stir that up, right? And then I might not be ready to deal with it. So unprocessed pain and trauma, unprocessed fear. There's also fear of being overwhelmed or used. What if I give that person money and they go and, buy alcohol? We want to control it. We want to say, it's like, well, I'm going to give you money and I want you to use it for that and that. Can we just let them be? There might be biases and prejudice. There is so much going on in the world that we don't know the history of. The other day, I was having dinner with some friends, and one of the guests said to me, it was the first time I met him, and he said to me, you know, do you know that potatoes are not a native plant to Europe? Which was totally new to me because I grew up eating potatoes every day, and so do they in Germany, and we know about Irish potatoes. And he said, no, they are actually, it's a native plant of the Americas, from the Andes. And it was not introduced to Europe till the 1500s. And he said, let me tell you something else. Can you imagine Italian food without tomatoes? There are tomatoes all over Italian food. And he says, tomatoes were also not a native plant to Europe, also came from the Americas and was introduced in Europe in the 1500s, and it was actually not used till the 1700s. So every story always has a lesson for me, and I was just thinking about that, and I go like, isn't this so amazing, right? It seems quite, it doesn't really matter if I knew if potatoes were a native plant or not. But what it brought home to me is that how much there is that I don't know, and that I don't know the history of it. And that bringing potatoes from the Americas to Europe made a huge difference. Bringing tomatoes from the Americas to Europe made a huge difference in the cuisine. I imagine it has made a huge difference in other ways as well. what he told me was also in Ireland, that the potatoes became so popular in Ireland because you can have a lot of food. Like when you plant potatoes in a small box, you can feed a family of four, and it might not be, fully nutritious, but it feeds people. And people were very hungry. So the king of Ireland actually introduced potatoes so he could feed the people. So it had a huge impact. Now, when I think a little further, it's like, we're talking about race, for example. Race is a concept that was made up. It was made up a few hundred years ago for political reasons. It was not in existence before that. They didn't talk about blacks and whites or, that wasn't in existence, but it was used to be able to diminish a certain group of people. If you don't know that, and if you're told that people of color are less than you, and that scientifically it is proven, and medically it is proven that they are not as intelligent, and you grow up with that because that's what you're being told, then that lives in your body. And you have to be really careful. So then when you see somebody suffer, you're coming from that place that that person is not whole. Or if certain qualities are, related, race related, and it is like black people always do this, it's their fault, and you hear that over and again, that gets in the way of compassion. So that story about the tomatoes and the potatoes really made me think how important it is that we understand where things come from, that we understand where information comes from. And because also when race was introduced, they made sure that the church, the medical profession, and science was behind what they started to say. And often those are the places we trust for information. Judgment and moral superiority. It's like some time ago, I learned about the different streams of Christianity and their beliefs and how they related to supporting people in their community. And so, for example, was the Catholics really thought that social support should come from the church. The Lutherans were very much coming from the idea that it should come from the state. So they really supported that. The Calvinists believed that God had chosen certain people to go to heaven and that it was preordained. So if you were not preordained, that was just too bad. And we might, we might help you out a little bit and give you a little bit of food, but, it's like you're just a lost soul. And it was like, I didn't really have to do anything about that because I was the chosen one. If I have money, if I have status, that means that I'm the chosen one. If you don't have that, then you're just not chosen. Cultural or familiar conditioning, in families where we're sometimes told that we should be tough. Be tough. Don't be a whoosh, Just toughen up. And then the other reason is that we're disconnected from ourselves. We're just not feeling anymore. We're numb. And it's, what I just not too long ago, I was actually at a synagogue and the rabbi was saying, it's like, if when we get too stressed out, we tend to disappear. And recently I started taking yoga lessons again, and it's Iyengar yoga, and Iyengar yoga really focuses on how to position the body. And the teacher was saying, Yeah, often that's a criticism about Iyengar yoga because they said there are too many rules, but it's not about that. It's about really focusing. And when we focus, then we quiet the mind. And when we focus on the body and we quiet the mind, then there is space again. And it has been amazing for me because I feel so alive after yoga. It's like I work the muscles, I bring my attention right here, and it truly feels like, oh, I am present again. So, with all the stress that is around of what we might experience in our lives, we have a tendency to disappear. And when we disappear, we get numb. And then we don't see the people anymore, or we can't handle it anymore. So, how do we live with compassion? Self compassion is really the foundation. We have to start with ourselves. I went through a pretty deep healing process a number of years ago. And one of the things I realized, it's like for me, it was really important that I had a lot of compassion for myself. I didn't beat myself up for the things that happened or what I experienced in my body or what I experienced in my life. So the only way to heal, for me to have some space to move on, was to have that compassion. And to say, it's like, yes, that might not have worked, and now I can do it differently. Now I can make another choice. When I started doing that, a lot of healing took place in my relationship with my mom. And my mom was already not alive anymore, but I started to think about her life. She had a lot of grief in her life, a lot of unprocessed grief that affected us as kids. But then I started to think about her. And I thought, when she was in her early 20s and my dad was in his late teens, they lived through World War II.
Mm.
And when I read about World War II and how people experienced that, and there was the hunger winter that they had to eat tulip bulbs, and the stress that my dad might be picked up and sent to Germany to work in the factory. And I go like, they never processed that. There was no space to process that. When the war was over, the only focus was on rebuilding. The therapies we know right now that are so effective, and especially the somatic therapies, they were not available. And I just started to feel so much compassion for my mother. And I was like, yes, it was not great, how she showed up for us at times, but she didn't have the bandwidth. She was so stressed out. She had so much unprocessed trauma. She did not have the space to deal with somebody else's, even though she wanted to. When I would go through something, that would trigger her trauma. And so just seeing that really changed my relationship with her and with my family. So it starts with ourselves. We have to be willing to do our work. We have to notice, and our bodies speak to us. We have to notice when we feel uncomfortable and be willing, even if it is just 20 seconds in that moment, to say, like, hey, what is that about? Can I breathe into that? I might not be able to make contact with this person right now, but at least I can breathe into what is sitting there. So I can shift it a little bit. Compassion also naturally arises when we do the spiritual practices, when we evolve on the spiritual path. Because, as I said, compassion is a quality of the divine. Compassion is a quality of spirit. So the more the layers are gone, the greater our heart opening is, the more it can flow forth. So therefore, it is really important to do the spiritual practices. It is really important to meditate. It is really important to do our prayer. And also when we do meditation, we can also do meditation on compassion. Compassion for ourselves, compassion for others. Stillness, presence, and slowing down. We can be so busy. But when I'm busy, I stay on the surface. For me, I know when I want to go deep, I need to have space. I need to have quiet. Going into nature really helps. We have to quiet down our systems. We have to integrate compassion with action. And that can be just little things, but like Marilyn also said, it's like we can give a smile. We can at least see somebody. We're in this teaching knowing that the divine is expressing as each and every one of us. When we see the person on the street, can we see them as divine? You know, in the Bible, there's a story that somebody asked, that Jesus says, I knocked on your door and you didn't open. And the person says, like, but when was that? And it is like, yeah, when the poor man came to you, that was me, you know? And it's like we can see it like that. The divine is right there on the street calling out to us. Then our whole feeling changes. Right, Nancy? Yes, you are. This morning you are. So compassion and resilience in difficult times, it's like here we are, you know. So how does compassion serve us? Because sometimes, and I've been there, I feel like when I need to give compassion, it takes something from me. And that is actually not so. Let me just tell you. Key hormonal changes happen when we practice compassion. Oxytocin actually goes up. Oxytocin is the hormone where we feel connected to another person. Cortisol goes down. Cortisol is the stress hormone. So it actually goes down so we're more relaxed. Endorphins can be triggered so we feel happy, you know. And serotonin increases, which also increases our ability to be kind, and it boosts our immunity, our immune function of the body. So when we practice compassion, we actually have reduced stress and anxiety. It strengthens our immune system, and it improves our cardiovascular health. And it also stimulates the brain reward centers, leading to increased happiness and life satisfaction. So next time you think like, I don't have it because I don't have anything more to give, just realize that when you practice compassion, you're actually giving to yourself. I want to tell you one more story. I just need to find it for a second. The Presbyterian Church has a part of the Presbyterian Church is called the Blue Angels. And they're volunteers and they help with disaster assistance. And so after Hurricane Katrina, they went to Louisiana to help. And there was a woman called Miss Mabel, and Miss Mabel was really depressed. Her house had been flooded and was in a really bad state. She didn't have any support and she had given up. She went to her bed, wouldn't eat, wouldn't move. And so the Blue Angels of Hope came in and just started doing little things for her. Not even, you know, they couldn't do that much, but they sat with her. She wanted to talk, they listened to her. They cooked and they cleaned. And within a week's time, she was up and cooking for them. Just that very simple gesture of being there for somebody can make such a difference. Just for the other person to know that there is somebody who is thinking of them. So practice compassion. You make it a better world and you will be healthier. Thank you very much.
Yes.